Name's Ray Delaney. I'm 68 now, living over a hardware store in Morton, Washington. But this starts a long way back, late October 1994, up near the Gifford Pinchot, just east of the Cascades. First snow dusting the ridge, wood smoke in the air, and that kind of cold damp that gets into your bones. I had a little cedar cabin out there, just me and an old beagle, buzzing fridge, clock ticking too loud. That night was ordinary. Coffee on the stove, radio low, rain tapping the windows until the knocks started. 3 of them, slow, heavy, on the outside wall near my bed. I told myself it was a branch. I remember the smell, though, wet fur and mud seeping in through the cracks. I shouldn't be telling this honestly, but it's been years. I know what people think when they hear Bigfoot. I heard those 3 knocks again last night. Wind drummed in the big firs that first week, a low, steady roar behind the cabin, like highway noise that never got closer. Inside, it was just the hum of the fridge and my beagle, Duke, snoring in front of the oil heater. I'd just taken the job watching a shuttered logging road, checking gates, keeping an eye on poachers. Nothing heroic, just long days, wet boots, and a dry roof. My neighbor, Old Man Carlson, gave me a ride up that first supply run. His truck rattled, heater whining, wipers squeaking across a fogged windshield. "You hear the stories?" he asked, staring straight ahead. "What stories?" I said, thinking bears, cougars. He smirked. "All that Bigfoot talk. City folks love it. Keep your trash locked up, that's all." I laughed it off. I really did. I'd heard about Bigfoot on TV specials, the goofy kind with blurry pictures and spooky music. I told myself people here just like their legends. That night, the wind dropped. The silence felt louder than the storm, just stove ticks and Duke's breathing. I shut off the lamp and watched the porch light throw that soft amber circle on the snow-dusted steps. Then came the sound. 3 knocks, same distance between each. Not on the door, on the side wall, right by my headboard. Duke growled, low and uncertain. The smell came next, damp earth and something like wet dog times 10. I lay there telling myself it was a branch, or a neighbor playing games, or the wood shrinking in the cold. I checked the locks twice anyway. The wall stayed quiet the rest of the night, but I couldn't shake the rhythm. 3 knocks. I didn't know it yet, but I'd hear those 3 knocks again. By January, snow swallowed the logging road. The cabin felt smaller, the ceiling lower. The main soundtrack was the wood stove breathing, crackle, pop, metal creak, and the occasional clunk of ice sliding off the roof. I'd pass the evenings with AM radio. One night, tuning past static, I landed on a late show out of Portland. Callers were going on about sightings near Mount St. Helens. Large bipedal hominid, the host said like he was proud to know the term. Folks call it Bigfoot, added, with that skeptical laugh. I remember snorting. "Sure," I said out loud, alone. "Bigfoot's calling in next." But I still turned the volume down, made it easier to hear the woods. Around midnight, Duke stiffened by the door, ears up. His tags chimed softly. There was a crunch of something heavy on the frozen path outside. 1, 2, 3 steps. And then the boards on the porch gave a slow, complaining creak, as if someone big had put weight on them. The porch light cast weak yellow through the curtains. I could see the shadow of the railing, the stacked firewood. Nothing else. No outline. No face. I told myself, deer. Maybe an elk that wandered close. I reminded myself that I do not believe in Bigfoot. Never did. Then the smell rolled in again. Wet fur, mud, and a sharp, almost metallic tang. Same as before. Duke didn't bark. He just whined and crawled halfway under the table. The steps moved away. Soft thuds in the snow, fading into the tree line. No knock that night. Just my own heart pounding in my ears and the quiet tick of the stove cooling down. I stayed up until dawn, watching the pale blue light seep in, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. When I stepped out to the porch, the only marks in the drift were my own from the day before. And somewhere in the trees, I swear, I heard a faint tapping, like 3 far-off knocks I couldn't quite place. By March, the snow started pulling back, leaving slick brown mud and patches of dead grass. Rain took over where snow left off. Light rain most days, just a soft hiss in the treetops, then a hard drumming kind at night that rattled the tin roof. I'd gotten used to the noises, branches, owls, distant coyotes. The 3 knocks hadn't come back in a while. I'd almost convinced myself they'd been some weird ice shift, or my tired brain turning stovepops into patterns. One gray afternoon, I came back from checking the gate. Boots muddy, shoulders sore, Duke trotting ahead. The air smelled like wet cedar and old leaves. He stopped halfway up the steps and wouldn't go further. His nails clicked on the wet boards. On the top step, right in front of the door, were 3 small rocks. Round river stones, about the size of chicken eggs. They were stacked, 1, 2, 3, in a little column, perfectly balanced. I stood there in the drizzle, water ticking off the brim of my cap, staring at those stones. The porch light wasn't even on, but I remember thinking how they'd look in that amber cone at night, like a little altar. "Okay," I said, half to Duke, half to whoever might be listening. "Very funny. You and your Bigfoot jokes, Carlson." I picked the stones up and felt how cold they were, how smooth. No footprints on the steps besides mine and Duke's, just wet wood. Inside, I dropped them in a coffee can on the counter. The lid rang when they hit, sharp metal clink echoing in the quiet cabin. I told myself it was kids, maybe some hunter's teenagers messing around. I locked the door, double-checked the window latches, then laughed at myself for doing it. That night, as the rain settled into a steady whisper and the fridge buzzed in the corner, I lay awake thinking about those 3 stones stacked just so. For no good reason, I kept listening for 3 knocks to follow them. The snow was gone by April, replaced by a constant damp chill. The forest smelled like rot and green things waking up. You could hear the creek again, a thin rush in the distance behind the constant whisper of the wind in the firs. I was walking the road one morning, boots sucking at the mud. Duke ranged ahead, nose down. Sunlight came through the clouds in pale, weak patches. Nothing cinematic, just gray with brighter gray. That's when I saw the prints. 2 of them, side by side, sunk deep into the mud on the ditch edge. Bare. Toes. Longer than my boot by a good half again. Edges clean, like whatever made them had passed not long before. Water was just starting to seep in. I stood there, breath clouding in the cool air, the smell of wet earth all around. A jay screeched once and then went silent. "Bear," I said, though they weren't right for a bear. "Just melted bear tracks, that's all." Carlson stopped by that afternoon in his truck, dropping off feed. I mentioned the tracks because I didn't want to, which is exactly why I did. He spat off the porch. "That's your Bigfoot," he chuckled, though he didn't look like he thought it was funny. "I don't go in for Bigfoot stuff," I said, "but something big's walking barefoot out there." That night, every creak of the cabin felt heavier. The smell of wet fur came back faintly through the gaps in the wall, or maybe I just remembered it and made it up again. The wood stove snapped, Duke's tags jingled, the wind bumped the eaves. I kept telling myself, misread tracks, old stories in my head, radio callers. People see what they want to see. Still, I put the bar across the door, and just before I finally drifted off, over the wind and the ticking stove, I thought I heard it, far off, dull through the trees. 3 hollow knocks, like someone hitting a rotten log 3 times and waiting for an answer. By the next winter, I'd fallen into habits I didn't like to examine too closely. When I got a deer, I'd hang what I didn't need right away on the old meat hook by the shed. For the coyotes, I told myself, keep them off the porch. But I hung it high, higher than a coyote could jump. The rain that November came sideways. You could hear it before you saw it, a distant roar that grew until it was pounding the roof, drowning the radio, turning the whole cabin into a drum. The air inside smelled like damp wool, wet dog, and the metallic tang of blood from the dressed deer in the shed. I was at the table sharpening a knife, the scrape-scrape loud in the small room. Duke lifted his head and stared at the door, ears twitching. That's when I heard the boards on the porch flex. 1, 2, 3 slow steps. No knock. Just wait. The porch light glowed dull behind the curtain, a wash of amber over the floorboards. I don't know why, but I whispered, "If you're out there, Bigfoot, you're getting the bad cuts." Saying it out loud made my skin crawl. I didn't believe in Bigfoot, not really, but the word sat in the air like a dare. There was a scrape, metal on metal, from the shed. The hook, a soft grunt, low, almost questioning. I froze, knife in my hand, heart hammering so hard I could hear blood in my ears over the rain. I wanted to fling the door open, shine a light, prove it was just wind and wishful thinking. Instead, I sat there, feeling like a trespasser in my own cabin. Next morning, the storm had blown past. The sky was a flat, cold blue. The ground squished under my boots. The meat was gone from the hook. The chain wasn't broken. The hook wasn't bent. Below it, in the mud, were deep impressions. Too long for my foot, too wide, as if something had stood there for a while, just considering. In the shed doorway, on an upturned crate, something, had left a cluster of berries arranged in a neat little pile. 3 of them. I told myself kids, neighbors, a prank. But I could still smell that wet fur in my mind, and I found myself listening, all day, for 3 knocks that never came. By the second summer, sleep wasn't something I did so much as something that happened to me if I got tired enough. I'd lie there listening to the fridge hum, to Duke's soft snores, to the wind slipping through the fir branches. Every pop from the stove had a shape in my mind. I kept telling myself I didn't believe in Bigfoot. I'd even say it out loud sometimes, like a prayer. No such thing as Bigfoot, Ray. You're just getting old and jumpy. One evening in June, the sky went that soft blue that never quite decides to turn dark. Mosquitoes whined near my ears. The air smelled like warm pine and wood smoke from someone's distant burn pile. I'd taken to leaving scraps, fish heads, old bread, on a flat stump just at the edge of the trees. For whatever's out there, I joked to Duke, but my hands shook a little when I did it. The pattern was always the same. Leave it at dusk, gone by dawn. No tracks I could make sense of. That night I stepped out to fetch in some split logs and almost stepped on it. On the porch rail right by the post lay a ring, not metal, not plastic. Strips of vine or thin branches, twisted together into a loop about the size of my palm, woven, almost braided. Inside the ring were 3 small feathers, placed side by side. The porch light washed everything in that dull amber, making shadows deeper. I could hear the distant rush of the creek and Duke whining softly behind the door. My thumb brushed the ring. It was damp but not rotten, smelling of sap and riverbank. I felt watched, not threatened exactly, but examined. Like somebody had been studying me and was now waiting to see what I'd do with their gift. I put the ring on the little table by the door, next to my coffee mug. I didn't throw it away. That bothered me later. In bed, the ticking clock sounded like footsteps in another room. I got up twice to check the lock, then a third time just because the first 2 didn't feel like they took. Right as I finally started to drift, Duke's head snapped up. His ears went forward. The cabin went very still. From somewhere near the tree line, dull but clear, came that rhythm I already knew too well. 3 knocks. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, wondering who was talking to who. The first frost painted the grass silver that year. You could smell it, sharp, clean, edges of autumn. The creek sounded louder in the cold, and even the old boards of the cabin seemed to shrink, their creaks tighter, higher. I'd settled into a routine with the unseen neighbor, scraps on the stump at dusk. Occasional gifts, stones, feathers, that woven ring, left on the porch or rail. We had a rhythm, though I'd never admit that out loud. I don't believe in Bigfoot, I'd tell myself while setting out a bowl of leftover stew. But whatever's out there's got better manners than most people. That night the wind was dead. The forest felt paused. No crickets, no owls. Just the faint hum of the fridge and Duke's breathing at my feet. The oil lamp cast a small pool of yellow on the table, leaving the corners of the room in soft shadow. Then the gunshot ripped through the stillness. Close enough the cabin windows rattled. A second later, a crashing in the brush, branches snapping like bones coming downhill fast toward the clearing. Duke bolted under the bed. I stood up so quickly my chair went over backward, clattering on the floor. The porch boards groaned once, twice. The door frame shivered. I could hear breathing on the other side. Ragged, wet, labored. The smell rolled in under the threshold. Wet fur, iron, and something sour-sweet like old blood. The porch light flicked on with a buzz. Through the thin gap in the curtain, I saw a shadow fill the doorway. Not the outline of a man. Taller, shoulders wider than the doorframe, head brushing the top. My heart was beating so loud I could barely hear the wind pick up again in the trees. For the first time I thought the word without flinching. Bigfoot. Not as a joke. Not as a campfire story. As if I were saying someone's name. The doorknob twitched, just a fraction. Not like someone trying to break in, more like someone too weak to turn it all the way. A low sound came through the wood. Half moan, half growl. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe it was the sound of pain in that noise. Maybe it was 30 years of being more scared of other humans than anything on 4 or 2 legs. I unbarred the door. The wood was rough under my palm. For a second, I thought about stopping, about calling the sheriff, about pretending none of this was happening. Instead, I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, smelling of frost and blood and wild. Something massive loomed there, hunched, one arm braced against the frame. In the weak spill of lamplight and porch light, all I saw was dark, tangled hair, a deep shadow where a face should be, and a leg twisted, held off the ground. The door frame cracked with a soft, splintering sound under its weight. We just stared at each other, me in my socks and flannel. Whatever that was, breathing hard, rain starting to patter on its shoulders. I won't hurt you, I whispered, which felt insane. You're a Bigfoot, aren't you? The breathing hitched, almost like it understood the tone, if not the words. Then it sagged, just a little, and I stepped back, heart in my throat, making space for a shadow bigger than anything I'd ever let into my life. The moment it crossed the threshold, the whole cabin changed. The boards complained under the new weight, a long drawn-out creak. The oil lamp flickered and steadied. The air felt thicker, full of damp fur and cold air, and something musky and animal that wasn't exactly unpleasant, just overwhelming. He, I guess, collapsed near the stove, one huge leg stretched out awkwardly, the foot twisted at a wrong angle. I could see the dark patch on the fur where the bullet had gone through, matting hair dripping onto my wood floor, the smell of blood mixed with the old coffee and stove smoke. I stayed near the door at first, hand on the knob, every instinct screaming to run. Duke peered from under the bed, eyes wide, tail tucked so far under, he might as well not have had one. I should call somebody, I muttered. Rangers, sheriff, somebody who deals with... I almost said Bigfoot, but the word caught. Saying it felt like naming him, and naming him felt like promising something. The radio in the corner hissed softly on some half-station, a faint mumble of voices too far away to make sense. The clock ticked, steady as a heartbeat. He made a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, not quite anything I recognized. His hand, massive, dark, fingers longer than mine, pressed against the wound. When he moved, his nails clicked against the floorboards, just like Duke's, only heavier. Fear started to bleed into something else. Pity. This wasn't a monster tearing through my door. This was something hurt, cornered, and, for whatever reason, trusting my little cabin more than the forest. I grabbed my old tackle box. The one I'd turned into a medical kit after I sliced my hand on a chainsaw years back. Rubbing alcohol, bandages, needle and thread. My hands shook as I came closer. The heat radiating off him was like standing near the wood stove. I'm going to help, I said, ridiculous as that was. You understand any of this? His head turned, just a fraction. I still couldn't see his eyes clearly, just the shifting of shadow. The breathing slowed, deepened as I dabbed at the wound. He flinched once when the alcohol hit, a small, strangled noise escaping his chest. Hunter got you, huh? I murmured. They won't believe they shot Bigfoot and lost. I wrapped the leg as best I could, threading bandage under and around, working by lamplight. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold. Every now and then he'd make that low sound again, like distant thunder, and I'd have to stop and remind myself. If he wanted me dead, I'd already be there. Outside, a truck passed on the distant road, engine droning. Headlights swept faintly between the trees. Someone was out there, looking for something. Inside, in my cramped little living room, a wounded shadow leaned against my broken doorframe and let me touch what no one's supposed to even see. When I finally sat back, fingers cramped, the bleeding had slowed. His breathing was steadier. He let his head rest against the wall with a gentle thunk that made the whole place shiver. We stayed like that for hours, the stove ticking as it cooled, the occasional crackle of log. Duke creeping an inch closer, then another, my own heartbeat slowly coming down. Towards dawn, just as the first gray light seeped under the curtain, he pushed himself upright with a soft, pained grunt. He limped to the doorway, hand braced against the cracked frame, turned his head, just slightly, toward me. I swear I felt a thank you in that moment, even without words. Then he was gone, into the blue morning mist, leaving only muddy prints on my floor, and the hollow echo of 3 soft knocks he gave the outer wall on his way past. After that night, the forest felt different. Not safer, exactly, just fuller. Like I knew one more name on the long list of neighbors I'd never meet properly. For a while, I half expected people to show up. Guys with clipboards, trucks with logos, maybe even some TV crew asking, "So, sir, what was it like sharing your cabin with Bigfoot?" Nobody came. Life folded back in on itself. The world forgot my little patch of woods. But he didn't. It started with small things. A bent nail on the doorframe straightened overnight. Firewood stacked neater than I'd left it. The woven ring moved from the table to the windowsill, lined up with the sunrise. Every few weeks he'd leave something on the stump. A basket of berries woven from reeds I didn't recognize, a perfectly shaped branch like a walking stick, once even a bunch of wildflowers tied together with braided grass. 3 knots. I kept up my end. Meat on the hook, bread crusts, apples when I could afford them from town. I got old doing it. My hair went thin and gray, my hands stiffened, and the cabin sagged a little more each year. The sounds became their own language. Heavy footfalls in the wet leaves meant he was passing by. The soft tap-tap of knuckles on the outer wall, once, twice, 3 times, meant he was close, lingering. Sometimes on late winter nights, I'd wake to the sound of breathing just outside the bedroom window. Not threatening, just there. A slow inhale, long exhale, clouding the glass. I bought a cheap flip phone once they got common, then a newer one, with a camera. In 2008, I think it was. Curiosity won. One foggy morning, I peeked between the curtains and hit record. Through the screen, I saw a vague, towering shape at the tree line, darker than the trunks, shifting from foot to foot. The resolution was awful, the focus worse. When I played it back later, it looked exactly like every blurry Bigfoot video on TV. I never posted it. Didn't even show Carlson the one time he came up to complain about kids talking that Bigfoot nonsense again. "Yeah," I said, stirring my coffee, hearing the 3 faint knocks from the trees behind the house as if in agreement. People will believe anything. At some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, I realized this wasn't an encounter anymore. This was a relationship of a sort. I'd shared my cabin, my food, my fear, my quiet with him for years. Decades, really. The nights when he didn't come by became the ones that scared me. Silence can be louder than footsteps, especially when you're used to the pattern of 3 knocks, and suddenly there's nothing at all. The winter that marked 30 years snuck up on me. The calendar said it clearly enough, but my brain still thought it was that guy from the 90s, sharpening blades at the table, not the one now, joints aching when the weather changed, heater humming louder to keep up. Snow buried the stump that year. I had to dig out a new flat spot near the tree line with my shovel, breath puffing in white clouds, the air smelling like cold metal and smoke from the stove chimney. I left out what I could: scraps, a couple of bruised apples. My pension check didn't stretch as far, but it felt wrong not to keep the pattern going. That's the thing with routines. They start as choice and end as obligation. He still came, not as often, slower. I could hear the difference in his steps, one heavier than the other, the old wound from that bullet, never fully forgiving him. The gifts changed too. Where it used to be berries or feathers, I started finding other things on the porch in the mornings. A rusted pocket knife, a torn-off piece of blue tarp, once a woman's glove, pink, with little white snowflakes knitted into it, stiff with frost. The porch light threw them into dull amber each dawn when I opened the door, my breath steaming, the boards cold under my bare feet. I told myself he was just picking up whatever he found, scavenging like anything else out here. Still, I started listening to the radio news more, scanning for missing person reports, lost hikers. I don't believe Bigfoot is out there hurting people, I muttered one night, staring at the glove on my table. He's just collecting, like a magpie. The cabin sounded different that night. The wind blew in fits and starts, branches scraping the roof more often than usual. The fridge made a new rattle. Even Duke's old collar, hanging on a nail by the door since he passed, jingled once with no one near it. I checked the lock twice, then a third time. Around. 2 a.m, I heard it. 3 knocks on the outer wall, softer than I remembered, as if made by a tired hand. I almost answered out loud. Instead, I turned out the lamp and sat in the dark, listening to the slow crunch of retreating footsteps and wondering what else he'd picked up out there. And where. When the snow started to go, the world smelled like mud and old leaves again. Water dripped from every branch. The creek ran high and angry, churning brown. One afternoon, a break in the rain tempted me farther from the cabin than usual. The old logging road was more ruts than road, lined with ferns beaten flat by winter, the air filled with the quiet hiss of distant drizzle. I followed the pattern of gifts like breadcrumbs in my mind. The glove, the tarp scrap, a pair of sunglasses left on the stump one morning, lenses cracked but still catching light. Curiosity got the better of me, and that's saying something after 30 years of knowing when not to ask questions. "If you want me to see, I'll see," I said under my breath. "But if this is your secret, Bigfoot, I might wish I hadn't." A faint smell rode the air, under the usual wet earth. That musky fur scent, older now, tinged with something like smoke. I stepped off the road where the ground dipped, boots sliding on the slick slope, one hand brushing damp trunks for balance. The trees closed in, light turning green and dim. The sound of the creek got louder as I approached a shallow ravine. Down there, half hidden by ferns and leaning logs, was a kind of arrangement. Rocks stacked into low piles, not neat like grave markers, but deliberate in their clustering. 3 rocks here, 3 there. Little circles of them around cleared patches of earth as if someone had swept away leaves again and again. On the cleared patches lay objects. A child's rain boot, cracked and faded. A rusted thermos lid. An old trail map, edges ruffled and eaten by damp, weighed down by stones. A locket I recognized only because I'd held it once every day for years, my wife's, lost on a hike before she passed. For a second, Everything in me went quiet. Even the creak sounded far away. I picked up the locket with numb fingers. The clasp finally gave, and there we were, younger faces behind fogged plastic, smiling at some long-ago camera. "How'd you get this?" I whispered, voice shaking. "How long have you been watching?" There were bones, too, scattered among the leaves, mostly small. Deer, I told myself, maybe elk. One or two looked wrong, though. Too straight, too clean, too much like something from a medical textbook. My muscles wanted to run. My mind wanted to stay and catalog everything. Something else entirely wanted to kneel down and put it all back exactly how I'd found it, as if I'd never been there. I heard it before I saw him. A heavy step, careful on wet ground, breathing, slow and deep from the trees above. I didn't look up, not right away. The ravine held its breath with me. I slipped the locket into my pocket, feeling like a thief. Then, just as softly as the sound had approached, it faded back into the rain and the distant crackle of a branch giving way. He'd brought pieces of other people here for years. Lost hikers, hunters, me. Little bits of our lives gathered in one hidden place. Whether he'd taken them from bodies or from abandoned camps, whether he was remembering or confessing, I didn't know. That not knowing was the terrifying part. I climbed out of the ravine on shaky legs, the locket heavy against my chest. Behind me, unseen, the rocks and bones and objects waited in their circles. On the way back, 3 knocks echoed faintly through the woods, not angry, not demanding, just acknowledging that the secret was shared now. The sky that evening was the color of old bruises, purple and gray layered over the ridge. Wind kicked up in fits, rattling the eaves, whistling through gaps in the boards. The porch light flickered once, then steadied into its usual amber halo. I'd been jumpy all day. The locket hung heavy around my neck under my shirt, a cold coin against my chest. Every time I touched it, I smelled that ravine again. Wet earth, old bone, and the faint fur musk that had become so familiar. I kept telling myself stories. "He finds lost things," I muttered, pacing. "He puts them where they won't be swallowed by the forest. That doesn't mean Bigfoot hurt anyone." But there were missing posters I remembered from the grocery store, news reports about hikers gone astray in bad weather, all the probably fell and must have got turned around explanations that never sat right. The fridge hummed, the clock ticked. Duke's empty collar on the nail by the door chimed once when the wind hit the cabin just right. Then came the 3 knocks. Not on the sidewall this time, but on the door itself. Slow, gentle enough not to rattle the glass. My hand shook on the knob. I thought about not opening it. About pretending I wasn't home, like you can fool something that's been listening to your every breath for 30 years. I opened the door. He stood at the edge of the porch light, half in shadow, older, like me. Hair more tangled, movements stiffer. The leg I'd bandaged all those years ago still didn't sit quite right. Rain spattered his shoulders. Behind him, the trees shifted in the wind, dark against a darker sky. We stared at each other. I could hear his breathing over the storm building in the distance. A low rumble, almost in sync with the thunder. "I saw your place," I said quietly. "The ravine." No reaction I could read. A tilt of the head, maybe. A tiny shift of weight. Hard to say. I don't know what you've done, or haven't done. I don't know if you saved those people or just outlived them. My throat felt tight. The locket was a cold weight. He made a sound then, low and drawn out. Not a growl, not a word. More like a sigh dragged through a chest too big for this world. For the first time, I found myself angry with him. "You took my wife's locket," I said. "How long were you that close to us? Why didn't you—" I trailed off. "Help us? Stop her dying anyway? Bring her back? What exactly was I asking?" His shoulders slumped, just a fraction. One hand, huge, dark, scarred, touched the cracked doorframe where he'd leaned years before, fingers resting on the splintered wood like he was reading it. "I've been scared of you for 30 years, I said, voice barely above the wind. "And now I'm scared of the world you live in, of what I don't know." Lightning flashed, turning everything blue for a heartbeat. In that moment, I almost saw his face, not details, just the impression of eyes that weren't wild at all. They looked tired. "I won't tell," I heard myself say. It surprised me as much as it must have him. "I won't tell anyone about you, or that place. Not the real story, anyway." The word Bigfoot tasted different in my mouth this time. Not a joke, not an accusation, something closer to a name you say at a grave. He stepped back, out of the porch light, into the soft, swallowing dark. The smell of wet fur faded with him. The last thing I heard, before the storm finally crashed overhead, was 3 soft knocks on a tree out in the yard. Not a warning, a goodbye. These days my woods are 4 potted plants on a windowsill and a faded photo of the cabin taped to the wall. The rain sounds different in town, more like a steady hiss on asphalt than a song in the trees. There's always some noise, a TV through the wall, a truck backing up, the hum of the soda cooler downstairs. I don't sleep much. Haven't, really, since the first 3 knocks back in '94. I still get up once, twice, then a 3rd time some nights to check a door that's been locked for hours. On the top shelf of my closet, in a shoebox under some old flannels, is the flip phone with the blurry video, the one where a dark shape moves at the edge of the tree line. Looks like every other grainy Bigfoot clip you've ever seen. Next to it is my real evidence, the locket, a handful of feathers and small stones. That woven ring, dried and fragile now, little artifacts from a life I shared with something the world thinks is a punchline. People ask sometimes why I moved into town. I shrug, talk about age, about being too far from the hospital if something happens. I don't mention the ravine, or the way the woods felt after that last visit, like a stage after the actors have left, props still in place, air still humming with what almost was. I know what you're thinking, listening to this. You're thinking I'm lonely, or senile, or that I spent too long in the dark and started seeing shapes where there weren't any. Maybe you're right. All I can tell you is this. For 30 years, I shared my cabin with Bigfoot. Not like a roommate, more like a ghost you learn the habits of. I fed him. He watched me. We both pretended the world outside our little exchange didn't exist. And one day, I stumbled onto his secret, those circles of rock and bone and lost human things, and realized I was just another piece in his collection, another story he'd gone home carrying. I won't show you the video, or the locket, or the ring. Not because I'm scared of you laughing, because I'm scared you'll believe me. Sometimes, late, when the fridge kicks off and the whole apartment goes quiet, I hear it under everything else. 1, 2, 3 soft knocks, and I remember saying Bigfoot like it was a man's name, not a monster's. It wasn't a dream. It was a warning I still don't fully understand.